The president had his rally in Tulsa on Saturday, and it was his first rally in more than 3 months. He had been off the campaign trail because of the coronavirus pandemic. There had been, states pretty much across the country had banned gatherings of more than 10 people, 50 people, anything like that. And so the president wasn't able to hold these rallies. But in the few months between rallies, he had really started to sort of sink in the polls. His deficit to Joe Biden had grown in national polls and swing state polls. And he'd really just had a really rough stretch. The economy cratered, the pandemic, obviously, and a couple other things came up. So this was really supposed to be the rally that got him back on track, that he was able to kind of rejuvenate his campaign, get momentum back. So there was a lot of anticipation, and the campaign really kind of played into that by touting, that they had more than 1 million people RSVP for tickets, which are free. You just have to punch in your name and your contact info to get a ticket. But they had really set expectations very high. They said there was going to be this big overflow area outside the arena that the president was going to address. So certainly there was a lot of expectations that this was going to be sort of his big, huge return to the campaign trail and a big moment for him. And it didn't quite meet those expectations. So the Tulsa Fire Department, I believe, said it was that the arena holds a little over 19,000 people, and it was about a third of the way full. So not quite 7,000 people were in the arena. There's some reporting that, people on TikTok or younger people had this big concerted effort to kind of try and dupe the campaign by giving them either false information or signing up for tickets that they had no intention of using. And that's true to an extent that people did that. But if the campaign truly had, as they say, more than 1 million RSVPs, I think those pranks probably accounted for only a fraction of those. So, even if half of the signups were accurate, if 7,000 people show up out of 500,000 RSVPs, something clearly went awry there. And I do think that a big part of it is probably the coronavirus. The president has really tried to portray it as, that it's safe to reopen, it's safe to get back out there. His campaign had said that they were going to hand out, and they handed out masks and hand sanitizer. So they said it was going to be a safe environment. But I think that, the end result just kind of shows that there are certainly people who are still a little skittish about getting back out there, and especially holding or attending an event that's in an inside environment like that, where people are really packed close together, because those are the exact types of events that public health experts have said should kind of be the last thing that people start doing, once we're closer to a vaccine or once there are proven drugs that work to treat this thing.
%81 overall. I mean, if I asked voters in a poll if the sky is blue, you get around 81% saying yes, and others just being difficult. I think this question is really fundamentally asking, do you think we've been effective at reducing the spread? It's less about the social distancing. Have all of our efforts. That's what voters are responding to there. And I think when you see the slightly lower number among Republicans, all you're really seeing is some Republicans refusing the premise of the question and saying, well, I don't think it was that bad to begin with. I think we saw a fundamental change in attitudes around the time of all the Black Lives Matter protests that started happening, and now into the return of the rallies, in that voters have come to accept that if there is something that I feel passionately enough about, then I'm willing to go out there and take some form of measured risk. And that's what we're all doing in terms of returning to the job, to the workplace, and getting on with our lives in some way. It's balancing that safety versus the common good, our own personal economic good, the political good, whatever the other thing that we're balancing it against. And so voters, I think, have begun to see or begun to come to the conclusion that they can achieve that balance, which is part of what we're looking for, when we need to reopen the economy. We need to do it safely. And I think that's where a lot of folks' heads are at, that we can do both. We must do both. Return to a semi-normal life, whatever the new normal is, but while protecting ourselves and being as smart about it as we can be. When I look at rally sizes, I don't think we can take a sample size of one rally and understand what the larger ramifications are for the fall. There were a lot of forces at work here. Obviously, some chaos agents going in and ordering extra tickets to drive up the number to begin with, and the impact that had on some folks who might have come, who actually legitimately wanted to come and saw a number of 1 million tickets and thought, no thanks. I think the more difficult issue for campaigns going forward is, now that we have let this cat out of the box of going in and messing around with other campaigns' ticketing activities, you're going to see this happen on both sides now. It's going to be, we've unlocked this door, and I don't think there's any way we're going to go back in. And it's going to be very challenging for campaigns to understand, when they do rallies, when they do public events, how much of this is legitimate, how much of this is the other side playing games with us, and how do we manage expectations. I think the other thing that made this rally look worse than it was this idea of that expectations, talking about how many of those tickets had been requested. I mean, that was, if there's one thing you learn in many ways, especially in politics, is that you keep lowering the expectations, and then you make sure that you over deliver on them. And there was no way you were going to deliver on 800,000 tickets.
I think this is sort of the fundamental question when we think about the new hotspots emerging in Arizona and California, Texas, North Carolina, South Carolina, a wide swath of states, primarily in the Sun Belt, but elsewhere too. And most of the public health officials believe that it's probably not possible to get Americans to re-engage in the kind of quarantine and aggressive social distancing that they did in the past. So, and I doubt we would get any of that leadership from the federal government. I mean, there's been a really inconsistent communication between the CDC and some of the key public health figures and the Trump administration. So I think that's sort of been part of the problem. But I think also, we let the genie out of the bottle, and now people are, the weather's nice. People have been kind of on lockdown for 3.5 months. And so I think it's going to be very difficult to get people to take such aggressive steps. And now I think you're seeing a greater focus on people wearing masks. And in our recent survey that we conducted at the end of May, early June, we found that 80% of Americans said they were using masks. Now, this may not be all the time. We just asked whether you had done it before. So it might be that people are only wearing masks when they're going grocery shopping or had to go indoors with a lot of people for some reason. And we also saw both at the recent Trump rally in Oklahoma and the protest, a really significantly different pattern of mask wearing. So at the Trump rally, they were handing out masks for folks, but very few people in the videos that I saw and that were reported were wearing any. Contrast that to the protests where you saw people were outside, which is generally considered safer. People were generally wearing masks, and the early indications are that those protests, which were all over the country, did not lead to a significant uptick in infection rates. So we'll see what happens in Oklahoma, whether there's a spike there. But so far, the outdoor mask wearing protest did not seem to lead to much of a spike.